Let's get started on part 3 of module 7, and we are on lesson 4, creating virtual machine snapshots. To understand snapshots, let's talk about the concept of a rollback. And 3 examples that you are already probably familiar with are the undo button in Microsoft Word, driver rollback in Windows 7, and system restore in Windows 7. One of my favorite buttons is the undo button in Microsoft Word. That way, if you accidentally delete an entire paragraph, you press the undo button and it brings it back. Or another example is driver rollback. If you install a new driver in Windows 7 and it's the wrong driver and it makes things worse, you can go into Device Manager and you can select driver rollback, and that allows you to roll back to the previously installed driver, just for one individual driver. Or if you use system restore in Windows 7 or Windows 8, it allows you to restore all variables which have changed, to roll back all drivers, all modifications which you've made. That's called system restore. Rolls back all modifications that you have made. So 3 examples of the concept of a rollback would be the undo button in Microsoft Word, driver rollback in Windows 7, Windows 8, and system restore in Windows 7. Now let's look at VM snapshots and look at the concept of rolling back a virtual machine. When we make a virtual machine snapshot, it takes the virtual disk, the .vmdk file, and makes a copy of it, the whole disk. And that way we can roll it back to a previous point in time in case we really screw something up. To make a snapshot, we right-click on the virtual machine, select Snapshot, select Take Snapshot. Give the snapshot a description. I've recently installed vCenter Server, so I will call the snapshot install a vCenter Server. I click on OK, and it makes a copy of the .vmdk file. If I look at that virtual machine under Snapshot Manager, I can see this is the snapshot that I just created. If we browse the data store, we can see this .vmdk file is the virtual disk for this virtual machine, and then we can see down here is the snapshot file of that virtual disk that we made when we created the snapshot. So typically you should create a snapshot every time you make a major modification to the virtual machine or to the guest operating system or any applications that you install. Typically create a snapshot after you make a clean install, after you install an important application such as vCenter Server, and after you install updates. In this example right here, we can see that a snapshot was made for a new install of the server, a snapshot was made when vCenter Server was installed, and snapshots were made after these updates, and that way we could roll back to any one of these points just in case we really goofed something up. Reverting a snapshot. So if the system becomes unstable or corrupt, you can roll the system back, and that's called reverting to a snapshot. To revert to a snapshot, we go to the virtual machine, right-click, select Snapshot, and select Revert to Current Snapshot. We click on OK, and it rolls back to the last snapshot that we had created. A snapshot is a copy of a virtual hard disk, and after a while it can take up a lot of space on the disk. So to save disk space, we would delete old snapshots. To delete a snapshot, right-click on the virtual machine, select Snapshot Manager, and I could delete a snapshot, and I could delete another snapshot to save space on the disk. Now let's look at Lesson 5, creating a vApp and removing a virtual machine. A vApp is not an application. It's a group of virtual machines that typically work together, and you can configure their startup order, which is important because typically we want the database server to be running before the application server is running, and the application server to be running before the web server is running. So to do that, under vApp, what is a vApp? A vApp is a group of virtual machines that can be managed as a single object. So to create a virtual app, we'll create the virtual app and then add virtual machines. I right-click on my ESXi host and select New vApp. Give it a name such as Customer vApp, followed by Next. We will talk about resource allocation later. Click on Next, finish. There's my new Customer vApp, and it has no virtual machines in it. So I could right-click and select Create a New Virtual Machine, or I could just drag and drop each one of these virtual machines. I could drag and drop the database server, drag and drop the application server, and drag and drop the web server into this vApp. And then I could select Edit Settings, and I could configure them such that the database server starts first, then the application server, then the web server. And I do this because the web server is no good to us if the application server doesn't work, and the application server is no good to us if the database server doesn't work. So I configured the startup order followed by OK. And then when we power them on, they are all powered on in the correct order. The vApp is not an application, but it's a group of virtual machines that work in conjunction with each other, and we can configure the startup order. Another example of a vApp. Typically, these three infrastructure servers, you would typically want your DHCP server to start first because the DNS server requires that machines have IP addresses, and then we would want the DNS server to start next because Active Directory is based upon DNS. Another example of a vApp, and we can configure the correct startup order. And then to remove a virtual machine versus deleting it from the disk, if you go to virtual machine, right-click on it and select Remove it from inventory, all the files are there. It just gets it off this screen right here. But if you select Delete from disk, then it deletes all of the files which are associated with it. So if you really want to clean up disk space, then you would select Delete from disk. Module 7, Summary. In this module, we discussed creating templates and clones, modifying virtual machines, migrating virtual machines, creating virtual machine snapshots, and creating vApps and removing a virtual machine. This concludes Part 3 of Module 7. Thank you very much.